From the pinnacle of corporate success to the depths of personal failure, Alexander Davidson's journey through Singapore's glittering business world takes an unexpected turn when he loses everything he thought mattered. Watch as a man who once worshipped success discovers the transformative power of faith, redefining his understanding of love, purpose, and true fulfillment in ways he never imagined possible. The neon lights of Singapore's business district painted harsh shadows across my office desk as I stared at the divorce papers for the third time that evening. My name, Alexander Davidson, typed in cold legal font, seemed to mock everything I'd built over the last 15 years. At 42, I was exactly where society said I should be, regional director of operations for a Fortune 500 company, a penthouse apartment overlooking Marina Bay, and a seven-figure salary that kept growing. But in my hand was proof that success in a boardroom doesn't guarantee success at home. Sarah's message was still on my phone. "I can't do this anymore, Alex. The papers are being delivered today. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." 15 years of marriage, summed up in 2 sentences and a legal document. I couldn't blame her. The signs had been there for years. The late nights at the office, the missed anniversaries, the constant travel. I'd convinced myself it was all for us, for our future. Now there was no us to build that future with. My spiritual journey had been as superficial as the corporate relationships I'd cultivated. Church was a Sunday obligation, a networking opportunity that looked good on the social calendar. God was a concept I acknowledged, but never really knew. Sarah had been different. Her faith was genuine, lived out in small acts of kindness and quiet morning prayers I'd often rush past on my way to early meetings. The irony wasn't lost on me that on this night, as my marriage crumbled around me, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I prayed. It wasn't a polished prayer, not the kind I'd occasionally offered during church services when others were watching. This was raw, desperate, and real. God, if you're there, I don't even know what to ask for anymore. The Singapore skyline sparkled beyond my office window, a testament to human achievement and ambition. Yet in that moment, surrounded by all the trappings of success, I felt utterly lost. The carefully constructed facade of the confident, successful executive was cracking, revealing the broken man beneath who'd sacrificed his marriage on the altar of career advancement. My phone buzzed again, another message from Sarah. "I'll always care about you, Alex. I hope you find what you're looking for." The gentleness in her words cut deeper than anger would have. She had always been the better person between us, even now, even in ending things. That night marked the beginning, though I didn't know it then. In my darkest moment, when I'd given up on love, both human and divine, something stirred. A small voice, barely audible above the hum of the office air conditioning, whispered that this ending might also be a beginning. As I finally left the office at 3 a.m., the city quiet save for the occasional taxi, I found myself whispering another prayer. "God, I don't know if you can fix this, but I can't do this alone anymore." Little did I know, this admission of helplessness would be the foundation upon which God would build something entirely new. The night I gave up on love would become the night everything changed, just not in the way I could have ever imagined. The corporate world of Singapore had been my sanctuary for so long that I'd forgotten what real human connection felt like. My assistant, Ming Wei, had worked with me for 6 years, managing my life with quiet efficiency. The morning after my late-night crisis, she took one look at my face and did something unprecedented. She cancelled my morning meetings and brought me actual coffee instead of my usual expensive espresso. "Mr. Davidson," she said, placing the cup on my desk, "my uncle is a counselor at Faith Community Church. He helps people who are going through difficult times." The hesitation in her voice was new. Ming Wei had never crossed the professional boundary before. I later learned she'd been praying for me for years. The corporate tower where I worked housed hundreds of professionals, all chasing the same dreams I had. James Chen, our CFO, was one of the few who seemed different. He had what people called work-life balance, though I'd always seen it as a weakness. He left at 6 p.m. most days, led a small group at his church, and somehow still managed to keep our financials impeccable. I'd avoided his invitations to lunch for months, but now, in my brokenness, I found myself asking if his offer was still open. "Always," he said simply. And that's how I found myself at a small local restaurant away from the corporate crowds, picking at my chicken rice while James shared his own story. 10 years ago, he'd been where I was. Successful, divorced, empty. But his story hadn't ended there. The Singapore I began to see through James and Mingwei's eyes was different from the sterile, ambitious city I'd known. Behind the gleaming facades were small churches tucked into housing blocks, communities of believers who gathered in homes and food courts, sharing life and faith with a genuineness that made my networking Christianity seem hollow. Sarah had found her own community here, I learned. She attended one of those small churches, led a women's Bible study. James knew of her through mutual friends. Singapore's Christian community was surprisingly interconnected. "She's hurting too, Alex," he said gently. "But she's found strength in her faith. Maybe it's time you found yours." The words stung, but they also sparked something. In this city of millions, God was weaving together connections I'd been too blind to see, using people I'd overlooked to guide me towards something real. The first visit to Mingwei's uncle's church felt like walking into foreign territory. Pastor Daniel Tan's office was nothing like my corporate sanctuary. No floor-to-ceiling windows or designer furniture, just worn leather chairs and walls lined with books. My expensive suit felt out of place, like armor I couldn't shed. "Tell me about your relationship with God, Alex," he said after I'd awkwardly explained my situation. The question caught me off guard. I'd prepared to discuss my marriage, my career, my failures, but God. My silence spoke volumes. That week, everything seemed to unravel faster. The board was pushing for more aggressive expansion in the Asian market, demanding longer hours and more travel. Sarah's lawyer sent another batch of papers requiring my attention. My carefully compartmentalized world was colliding, and the pressure was becoming unbearable. I tried praying more, but it felt mechanical, like presenting a business proposal to a client I couldn't see. Pastor Daniel had suggested I start reading the Bible, but the words seemed distant, written for someone else. James invited me to his small group, but sitting in a circle with strangers, sharing feelings, it went against everything I'd trained myself to be. The breaking point came during a video call with our New York office. In the middle of my presentation about quarterly projections, Sarah's face appeared on my phone, the first call from her in weeks. I declined it, finished the meeting, and then sat in my office shaking. I'd done it again, chosen work over relationship. Nothing had changed. That night, in my empty penthouse, I poured myself a drink and did something I'd been avoiding. I opened the photo album from our early years in Singapore. There we were, young and in love, exploring temples and hawker centers, dreaming of the future. Sarah's smile was radiant, real. When had I stopped seeing it? When had my own smile become the practiced one I used for corporate headshots? "God," I whispered, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to change. I don't even know if I can change." The silence that followed was deafening. Pastor Daniel's words from our last session echoed in my mind. "Sometimes, Alex, God allows us to hit bottom so we stop relying on our own strength." I'd scoffed then. I was Alexander Davidson. I solved problems, fixed situations, made things happen. But sitting there, surrounded by memories of a life I'd lost and a happiness I couldn't buy back, I began to understand what true powerlessness felt like. The next morning, I did something unprecedented. I took a day off. No meetings, no calls, no emails. Instead, I found myself walking the grounds of St. Andrew's Cathedral, the oldest church in Singapore. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd lived here for 15 years and never once stepped inside. Standing there beneath the soaring white spires, I felt small for the first time in years, and somehow that feeling brought more peace than any business deal ever had. My journey toward faith was beginning to affect every area of my life, creating ripples I hadn't anticipated. My leadership style, once praised for its ruthless efficiency, began to feel hollow. During a particularly tense budget meeting, I caught myself about to berate a junior analyst for a minor error, something the old Alex wouldn't have thought twice about. Instead, I heard myself offering guidance, watched the surprise on everyone's faces, including my own. Mingwei's quiet faith took on new significance, as I noticed her small acts of kindness around the office, the way she left encouraging notes for the cleaning staff, how she always made sure new employees felt welcome. "You've changed, Mr. Davidson," she observed one afternoon, then added with a gentle smile, "You seem more human." The most unexpected challenge came from my younger brother, Michael, during his visit from Australia. He'd flown in supposedly to help me through the divorce, but his reaction to my budding faith was a mixture of concern and skepticism. "First the divorce, now you're getting religious? Alex, are you having a breakdown?" His words stung, because 6 months ago I would have had the same reaction. My relationship with Sarah remained complicated. Through our lawyers and mutual friends, I learned she was surprised by the changes people reported in me. Part of me wanted to reach out to show her this new person I was becoming, but Pastor Daniel wisely counseled patience. "This journey needs to be about you and God first," he advised. "Any reconciliation with Sarah needs to come from genuine transformation, not just the desire to win her back." The corporate world I'd thrived in began to feel like a foreign country whose language I was slowly forgetting. During a luxury resort development proposal, I found myself questioning the ethics of displacing local communities for corporate profit, something that would have never crossed my mind before. James, ever patient, helped me navigate these new waters, showing me how to balance Christian ethics with business realities. Even my condo, once a showcase of success, began to feel excessive. Each room filled with expensive furniture seemed to echo with emptiness. I started spending more time in local coffee shops, finding unexpected comfort in their simplicity. It was in one such shop that I had my first real conversation with Raj, our building security guard, and learned about his family's struggles. That conversation led to a friendship that would have been unthinkable to the old Alex, yet felt perfectly natural now. The moment everything truly changed wasn't dramatic. No lightning bolts or audible voices from heaven. It happened on a routine Tuesday evening, during one of James's small group meetings. We were studying the story of the prodigal son, a parable I'd heard countless times in my superficial church attendance, but had never really understood. As the group discussed the father's unconditional love, something inside me broke. I saw myself not as the lost son, but as the elder brother, righteous in my own eyes, following all the rules of success, yet missing the very heart of love. The tears came without warning, years of buried emotion suddenly finding release in that small HDB flat, surrounded by people who had become more than just acquaintances. "I've been running the wrong race," I managed to say through my tears. "All these years I thought I was building something meaningful, but I was just hiding from real love, from God, from myself." James's hand on my shoulder steadied me as the group naturally gathered around, their prayers washing over me like gentle rain. That night, alone in my study, I did something I'd been avoiding for weeks. I opened Sarah's old Bible, the one she'd left behind. A highlighted verse caught my eye. "For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" The words, written in her familiar handwriting years ago, seemed meant precisely for this moment. I found myself on my knees, not in the polite, formal way I'd learned for church, but collapsed in complete surrender. "God, I'm tired of being in control. I'm tired of pretending. I don't want to be successful anymore. I want to be real. I want to know how to love like you love. Please, help me learn how to love again. The peace that flooded my heart in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't the temporary satisfaction of closing a big deal or receiving another award. This was deeper, more foundational, like finally finding solid ground after a lifetime of walking on shifting sand. The next morning, I woke up different. The Singapore sunrise painted the sky in brilliant colors I'd never really noticed before. My phone buzzed with urgent emails and meeting requests, but for the first time, they didn't create anxiety. Instead, I found myself praying for each person behind those emails, seeing them not as business contacts, but as souls God loved. What happened next wouldn't make sense to my old self. I drafted an email to the board requesting a 2-week leave of absence, something I'd never done in my entire career. Then I called Pastor Daniel and asked if his offer to join the church's mission trip to a rural community in Malaysia was still open. The old Alex would have seen it as career suicide. The new Alex saw it as the next step in a journey that was no longer about climbing corporate ladders, but about discovering what it truly meant to love God and love people. The reactions to my transformation varied wildly. The board was skeptical, but intrigued by my request for leave. My track record brought me the benefit of the doubt. My team seemed both relieved and uncertain about this new version of their boss, who suddenly cared about their families and personal well-being. Ming Wei simply smiled, as if she'd been expecting this all along. The mission trip to Malaysia stripped away my last pretenses of control. Living in basic conditions, working alongside locals to build a community center, my expensive watch and designer clothes became meaningless. I learned more about servant leadership in those 2 weeks than in 20 years of corporate seminars. The calluses on my manicured hands became badges of honor, marks of real work done for something greater than profit margins. Word of my changes reached Sarah through our overlapping social circles. She sent a brief message. "I'm glad you're finding your way, Alex. I'm praying for you." 5 years ago, I would have seen this as an opportunity to negotiate, to try to win her back. Now, I simply replied with gratitude for her prayers, understanding that my transformation needed to be about something deeper than saving my marriage. My brother Michael's skepticism began to shift when he saw me interact with Raj's family during their Deepavali celebration. The Alex he knew would never have sat cross-legged on the floor, eating with his hands, laughing with people he once would have considered beneath his social status. "You're different," he said later that night. "It's like you're finally the brother I remember from when we were kids." The most profound changes were the quiet ones. I started tithing. Not for tax benefits or social recognition, but out of genuine gratitude. My expensive penthouse began to feel too big, too empty. I found myself drawn to simpler living, even considering a move to a more modest apartment where I could host small group meetings and perhaps offer shelter to those in need. My approach to work shifted fundamentally. In meetings, I began advocating for ethical business practices and employee welfare. Some board members raised eyebrows, but others found themselves intrigued by this new perspective. James and I started a weekly prayer breakfast for interested colleagues, creating a small but growing community of believers in the corporate world. The true test of my transformation came 6 months after my mission trip experience. The board proposed a major restructuring that would involve laying off hundreds of workers across Asia. The old Alex would have seen it as an unfortunate but necessary business decision. The new Alex saw faces, families, and souls. I spent 3 nights in prayer seeking God's wisdom. On the 4th morning, during my quiet time, I felt a clear prompting to seek an alternative. Working with James and a team of committed colleagues, we developed a bold proposal. Instead of layoffs, we would implement a profit-sharing program, reduce executive bonuses, including my own, and invest in employee development. It was risky, unconventional, and exactly what God was calling us to do. "You realize this could cost you your position?" James warned as we prepared to present to the board. I smiled, remembering how that thought would have terrified me a year ago. "Then it costs me my position," I replied, "but I can't go back to valuing profits over people." To everyone's surprise, the board approved our proposal, not unanimously, but with enough support to move forward. What followed was beyond anything we could have imagined. Employee morale soared, productivity increased, and our company began to be recognized not just for its profits, but for its ethical leadership. My personal ministry began to develop organically. Other executives, seeing the changes in my life and our company, started seeking me out for private conversations about faith, purpose, and ethical business practices. The prayer breakfast grew into a twice-weekly gathering, and we began a mentorship program pairing experienced Christian professionals with younger employees. Sarah and I had our first real conversation during this period. Over coffee at our old favorite spot in Holland Village, she listened as I shared my journey. "I never stopped loving you, Alex," she said softly, "but I couldn't compete with your priorities. I'm glad you finally found what you were really looking for." Though reconciliation remained uncertain, there was healing in those words for both of us. The mission work in Malaysia continued to draw me back. Every few months I would return to the village, now not just to build structures, but to build relationships. Watching city executives and rural villagers worship together, sharing meals and life stories, I saw God's kingdom transcending cultural and economic barriers. Pastor Daniel, observing my growth, invited me to share my testimony at various business forums and church events. Speaking about God's transformation in my life didn't come naturally at first. I was used to PowerPoint presentations and quarterly reports. But I learned that authentic vulnerability had a power that polished corporate speeches never could match. "Success looks different now," I told a group of young professionals at a ministry event. "It's not about what you achieve, but who you become. And more importantly, it's about who you help others become." Looking at their faces, I saw my old self, ambitious, driven, searching. But now I could offer them something better than a roadmap to wealth. I could offer them a path to true fulfillment. The whispers started circulating through the corporate offices in Singapore. Our CEO was retiring, and the board was considering internal candidates for succession. My name was mentioned frequently, along with 2 other regional directors. A year ago, this would have been the culmination of all my ambitions. Now, it presented a different kind of challenge. "You could do more good at the top," James suggested during one of our prayer sessions. "Think of the impact you could have." But something didn't feel settled in my spirit. I spent more time in prayer than preparation, seeking God's direction rather than planning my pitch to the board. During this period of uncertainty, Sarah reached out again. She had been following the changes in our company through business news and mutual friends. "I'm proud of what you're doing, Alex," she said over the phone. "You're becoming the man I always knew you could be." The conversation was warm but bittersweet, carrying the weight of what was lost, but also the hope of something new. The decision point approached from multiple directions. The board would announce their CEO selection in 2 weeks. At the same time, Pastor Daniel approached me about taking a larger role in their marketplace ministry, potentially leading a new initiative to bridge the corporate and Christian worlds. Meanwhile, the Malaysian village where we'd been doing mission work was requesting help to establish a sustainable business training center for their youth. I found myself back at St. Andrew's Cathedral, in the same spot where my journey had begun. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass, casting colored light across the empty pews. "I'm not asking for a sign," I prayed, "but for clarity. What's the next step, Lord?" The answer came not in a voice or vision, but in a memory, Sarah's words from years ago. "Life isn't about climbing higher, Alex. It's about reaching wider." Back then, I hadn't understood. Now, as I sat in the quiet cathedral, the pieces began to fall into place. The CEO position, the ministry opportunity, the mission work. They weren't competing choices, but connected pieces of a larger calling. The board meeting room fell silent as I concluded my presentation. Instead of the expected pitch for the CEO position, I had presented something entirely different, a proposal to split my current role, allowing me to serve part-time as a corporate advisor while establishing a foundation that would bridge business expertise with Christian ministry across Asia. "This is unprecedented," the chairman finally said, breaking the silence. "You're effectively removing yourself from CEO consideration to pursue what amounts to a charitable venture." The old Alex would have seen disappointment in his eyes. The new Alex saw curiosity, maybe even respect. "I believe this company has the opportunity to be more than just profitable," I replied. "We can be transformative. The foundation would partner with communities like the village in Malaysia, providing business training, microfinance, and mentorship. We'd be building something that lasts beyond quarterly reports. We'd be changing lives." As I spoke, I noticed Sarah at the back of the room. She had come at my invitation, her role as a community development consultant making her presence plausible. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Pride, not in achievement, but in purpose. The board's decision came 3 days later. They approved the foundation with full corporate backing, agreeing to match donations and provide resources. But they added something unexpected. They wanted me to remain as regional director, seeing the foundation work as an extension of our corporate social responsibility. "We need people who understand both worlds," the chairman explained. That evening, in Pastor Daniel's office, surrounded by James, Ming Wei, and other friends who had become family, I shared the news. "But that's not all," I added, and told them about my decision to sell my penthouse, using the proceeds to seed the foundation's work. The Malaysian village would be our first project, with plans to expand across Southeast Asia. Sarah approached me after the meeting. "I've been offered a position with a non-profit in Singapore," she said. "I'll be working with underprivileged communities. Our paths might cross." The possibility hung in the air between us, not as pressure, but as potential. "I'd like that," I replied simply. "God's been teaching me about his timing." She smiled, touching my arm gently. "You finally learned to wait on him." The next Sunday, I stood before the congregation at Faith Community Church, sharing my testimony. As I spoke about giving up on love being the moment everything changed, I realized the profound truth. It wasn't just about losing my marriage or finding God. It was about discovering that real love isn't something we achieve or earn. It's something we receive and then give away. Looking out at the faces in the congregation, I saw my own journey reflected back, the corporate executives seeking meaning beyond success, the broken relationships needing healing, the lives waiting for transformation. In that moment, I understood that my story wasn't just about personal redemption. It was about God's bigger picture, how he uses our deepest failures to create the most beautiful victories. 1 year has passed since that pivotal board meeting. The foundation, now called Reaching Wider Asia, operates in 3 countries, with plans to expand to 5 more. We've helped establish 15 small businesses in rural communities, created 3 training centers, and launched a mentorship program that pairs Christian business leaders with emerging entrepreneurs in underprivileged areas. The corporate world remains part of my life, but on different terms. 3 days a week, I serve as regional director, using my position to advocate for ethical business practices and employee welfare. The other days are dedicated to the foundation and ministry work. The balance isn't always perfect, but it's purposeful. Ming Wei now leads our corporate prayer ministry, which has grown to include 30 regular members. James continues to be my closest friend and advisor, helping me navigate the delicate balance between business and ministry. Pastor Daniel jokes that I spend more time in his office consulting on foundation matters than he does. Sarah and I have found a new kind of friendship, one built on mutual respect and shared faith rather than romantic attachment. While our marriage ended, God's healing in both our lives has created something unexpected, a testimony to His ability to transform even our deepest hurts into opportunities for grace. My brother Michael recently joined one of our mission trips to Malaysia. Watching him work alongside village children, covered in dust and wearing the biggest smile I'd seen since our childhood, I realized that transformation is contagious. "I get it now," he told me later. "This is what you meant by success looking different." The penthouse has been sold, and I now live in a modest apartment near the church, where I host weekly discipleship meetings for young professionals. The walls are decorated with photos from our village projects, each one telling a story of lives changed and hope restored. Sometimes, late in the evening, I stand at my window overlooking Singapore's skyline. The view isn't as spectacular as it was from the penthouse, but I see it differently now. Each light represents a story, a soul, a potential for transformation. Next month, we're launching a new initiative combining corporate training with spiritual mentorship across Southeast Asia. Sarah will be one of our program consultants. God's sense of humor and grace still amazes me. The night I gave up on love wasn't an ending at all. It was God's beginning, teaching me that His love was bigger than anything I had imagined, and that letting go sometimes means making room for something far more beautiful than we could have planned. If you're struggling with addiction, questioning your faith, or wondering if God can use you, know that He can transform any life, any workplace, any situation. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message of hope. Have your own story of transformation. Share it in the comments below. Your testimony might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.